Yeah. Thanks everybody for attending. We're just going to give it a second here while it looks like everybody's got connected now. I want to welcome everybody to the Microsoft Teams and O365 Power User session here today. Today we're going to be talking about Teams and SharePoint file storage. I'm Gerald Howland. I'm the CTO of Mytech Partners, and I'll be kind of leading us through this today. Just kind of some introductory beginnings here. First of all, because we're all in a team session, it is possible for us to all have our mics on. So one of the things that we'd like to do is we'd like to ask you to mute your mics just to kind of help limit the background noise and to provide us a good recording for everything that we're doing. We're also going to ask you guys to ask questions. Like this is meant to be kind of a conversation. To do that, there is a raise hand icon in the bottom bar of the team, or go ahead and type your questions into the chat messages, and we'll be monitoring for those and answering those as we go along. And also this time we're actually going to be asking some polls out there, and just kind of getting some better participation and just feedback throughout the event so that we can get some information from everybody. In fact, we're going to begin right now by starting with a poll. Stephanie's going to be posting a couple of poll messages out into the chat. If you click on this little chat icon down in the corner, that will help us out, and please feel free to respond to those chat messages. That will give us an idea of what exactly is how to take the direction and the rest of these sessions that we're looking at, and how to make sure that you get the most out of them. So Nathan would like to just kind of give us a little bit of more about who Mytech is. Nate, you want to take it away?
Yeah, and as you're filling out those poll questions, we're trying to figure out, as this is only our second session, we're trying to figure out some of the duration and frequency of this and how we can have the best impact at the right amount of time. So thanks for thinking about that and for giving us that feedback, and choose which ones you feel is most applicable for you, or multiple ones. This poll and the polls that are out there. So yeah, so this is not about Mytech, but we always like to let people know, because we are not a training organization. That's not why we do this. We are a business and technology consulting group that works with small and medium businesses. Over the last 20 years, we've developed a proven IT strategy that when we work and have the right conversations with our clients, we know can achieve proven and consistent results. It's just really to remove IT challenges, as we understand that as business owners and operators, that there are plenty of other challenges that we all have outside of IT. And we believe that if we can at least help remove the IT ones, it allows you to focus on serving your customers better, and enable you to be more adaptable to other business challenges. In the end, we hope that makes IT easy for you. That's what our team is trying to do. And if we don't do that, we're not perfect. We don't always achieve that, but we also ask you to give us that feedback if you feel we haven't. And putting that all together, we've realized that our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. So enough about Mytech. If you'd like to learn more about that, please let us know. But otherwise, Gerald, I'll hand it back to you. And thanks for everyone who's filling out those polls.
Thanks, Nate. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we cover here is what exactly is a power user. So we're asking power users to attend this session, but is a power user somebody who we're expecting to be an administrator of an environment, or is it somebody who's a or just an actual user? So one of the things that we're really trying to define is a power user in our eyes is somebody who is driving adoption in their organization, can help understand the pros and cons of taking certain actions, really does help lead the organization making those right IT decisions. Doesn't mean that you have to be the only one making them. It's just somebody that kind of helps lead the organization in what they're doing. Doesn't mean that you have to be an executive. It doesn't mean that you have to be a leader in your organization. It doesn't even mean that you have to be the person who's actually clicking the buttons or performing the administration actions. It just means that you're somebody who understands what the organization is trying to do and how to use the technology to improve it. So that's really what we're focusing on when we do these sessions. The sessions are all about getting the knowledge to help you make those intelligent decisions as you lead your organization. So what are we talking about today? Today we're talking about We're going to kind of do a quick recap of last month's Teams and SharePoint architecture session. We'll go through how SharePoint stores files and how those structures work. We're going to go through what the difference is between SharePoint Online versus SharePoint file servers or SharePoint Online versus on-premise file servers are. We'll go into what OneDrive for Business is, Teams file storage, how Teams actually stores those documents, and even talk a little bit about document lifecycles.
Hey, Gerald, we also have a question, a hand that was raised relative to, I think, the power user. So I want to, Matthew Berg, would you mind go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question? I just want to make sure if it's pertinent to that topic that we hit it.
It was about the survey. So myself and one other person at least are not seeing the chat icon like we usually would.
Okay, so you're not seeing at the bottom. That's interesting.
No.
The conversation, the chat window there.
No, I just have raise hand and show participants.
Huh.
Me too.
Well,
that breaks that.
Yeah, are you connecting via the browser versus the Teams app by chance?
No, I'm in Teams. Last month's had the chat, but this one does not.
That is interesting. Well,
just a sec here.
Let's see if we can fix that. Yeah, because we tried to work on having it, because of the number of people that registered, to have some interaction, and we tested it, and we're seeing a few people that are seeing that it's working. So I'm not sure what's working for them differently than for you. But thanks for bringing that up. And for the person that just joined, we just were having some chat window difficulties, trying to see if we can solve that problem. Yeah, someone noted that they're in the browser and it said it works fine for them. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any settings to control that right offhand.
Yeah. Well, we might have to try it a different way. I mean, we basically can build this into the follow-up survey, the follow-up that we send. We were just, we didn't get as much feedback as we were hoping, so we wanted to integrate it with the session, the live session. So hopefully you could just, get this out of the way. But I guess maybe it would make, yeah, I don't know if leaving the meeting, coming back might work. I don't know. But maybe we'll make sure that in the follow-up survey that we send, we'll include this information, and that way we can still get your feedback. We're trying to make it as timely, keep it as concise for you, so you're not having to do some follow-up action. But we'll just make sure that we send it in the follow-up email and have the survey there. So.
Hey, and Gerald, just to add as well with the forms, the polls, some people are having trouble accessing them in the actual chat as well. And when I posted the link to it, they're able to access them. So there might be there might be something going on with Teams right now.
Yeah, there may very well be. Yeah, I have not seen a notice right offhand, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something going on. So it might even be just the latest iteration or upgrade that Microsoft has done sometimes causes some glitches like this.
Yeah.
And so there might be something happening with this demo tenant that we use for these sessions. So
I think let's move forward with the planning on still hitting the polls. For those of you who can participate and see the polls, please do it. And maybe Stephanie, using that link, like you said, will work. And for those that can't, just know that we'll be following up with the email follow-up afterwards. So thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Okay. So just to kind of recap last month, we talked about the background and infrastructure of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. And one of the key things that kind of came out of that is SharePoint plays a key role in all of this. It really is the foundation of what Teams is, what Planner is, what all of these different services actually run. It actually becomes the heart and soul of a lot of those actions. We also talked about O365 groups, what the security around those structures are, what the pros and cons, how we can offload some of our administration tasks to our staff, or to the management groups that are actually managing those groups, to actually be able to make changes, do admissions, do staffing changes all by themselves without having to always raise tickets for IT to do that. And really kind of focused on that how everything ties together, especially around where SharePoint Online kind of comes in. So as we move forward, we're going to be talking about my slide changes. There we go. We're going to be talking about 365, obviously, in this scenario. And two of the areas that we're going to be really focusing on today are going to be SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. So just to kind of give you an idea that this does span across just about every licensing level. So there are features that don't exist in certain licensing packages. And our intention is to definitely try to point that out whenever it comes up. So we are trying to just want to basically point out that the features that we're going to be showing today are really across the board available to just about everybody. So we did talk about how SharePoint is really the heart and soul of this community. And really this is where everything kind of comes out of. We like to call it the Big Bang of SharePoint. So SharePoint really is the center of this universe of applications that Microsoft has built. Everything from Teams to OneDrive to the Power Automate, the Power Platform, Forms, all of that all integrates into a single space, with SharePoint kind of at the heart and soul of all of that. So as we go forward with this, you're going to see more and more of these pieces kind of build out on that SharePoint library, and you'll understand how big that core infrastructure really is. So what exactly is a SharePoint library, right? This is probably the easiest way to put it, right? It is a cloud-based application for storing files. But really, to get a little bit more detailed about this is based around SharePoint lists. So SharePoint lists are a format that are used inside the SharePoint platform to actually store data, much in a database format. So you can have records and columns of data. So this really is kind of that same format. In fact, as you get into it, you're going to be querying data, you're going to be filtering and sorting data just like you would inside of a database. The big difference is this adds files to that system. So that database technology is kind of the heart and soul of SharePoint. That's why you see it spread across so many different applications, is they really are using SharePoint as the database. And SharePoint lists are one of the key pieces of that. Part of us would want us to start off with SharePoint lists because it would actually teach you a lot of information, but Microsoft is in the middle of a major redesign of SharePoint lists right now, and we feel that it'd be better to train you on the new technologies that are going to be coming out in the next couple months before we actually teach you, versus teaching you kind of the existing and older format of that. SharePoint also, because of the way that it is a database, it actually adds workflow and automation to this. So that gives us the capability of doing business workflow around file additions or revisions, or having automations using the Power Platform to actually do notifications, or when a file is added, having it take different actions, moving things around for you. You can actually use that all through the Power Platform. It's also the foundation of the collaboration platform. So if you've attended any of our other training sessions, you'll know that Teams is really powerful, and the online applications allow you to have multiple people, multiple access, all of that kind of stuff. Really, the foundation of that, though, is SharePoint. SharePoint is the component that allows you to do that collaboration. It is the piece that is handling all of that real-time saving, the revisionary histories, all of that is necessary to do that. And then finally, it's actually it is a component that allows for the sharing of documents. And sure, a file server does the same thing, but what's unique about SharePoint is this is both internal and external access to that data. So we can share, we can build portals that our clients or our customers can access. You can build different collaboration interfaces. You can do a lot of that kind of stuff all out of the same set of data and the same storage of that data. So you aren't emailing documents around, you aren't having to send this information back and forth. It's all right in front of you in the same spot, the same data. And one of the other neat parts about this, much like how we talked about this as a database, right? You don't think of a file as a database, but we can add data to these documents. We can have a file out there that has additional data. We call that metadata. So SharePoint calls this data metadata. If you think of what a record is in SharePoint, a record or a list item is the file data, so the actual file itself, plus a bunch of metadata. By default, that metadata is information like created date, username, who created that data, who last modified it and when, a title, which is different than the name of the document. You can actually have two different sets of names, and even if the document is checked out and by who. One of the neat parts about doing all of that is that allows us to start searching, sorting, grouping, and filtering that data in different ways. Just like you would in a database, I can sort data, I can look at it in different aspects, in different formats, but it's all the same data, all the same way that we're looking at it. We like to think of this almost like tags or keywords. What can I do to search for tags? What can I do for searching for keywords? If you think of a document, you only have one way of viewing that document, but you might have multiple ways of finding it. And so that's really what metadata is adding. It's not to replace the document, it's to add additional information in ways of either filtering, organizing, or sorting that data so you can get access to those documents faster and easier. One of the things that we kind of like to point out, just kind of as a technical state, you are limited to about 8,000 bytes of data that is per record for this metadata information. But to put that into resolution for what we're looking at is that's about 250 additional pieces of text that you can add to the outside of that. So when we start talking about what are these metadata objects, they're also called columns inside SharePoint. You can add single lines of text, you can add multi-line text boxes, choices, so different menu choices that you can choose from, simple numbers, date, time fields. You can do lookups, so you can do cross correlation to existing data that's already out there. There are calculation fields that you can do, so you can do calculations that go pull up information or take multiple fields that I've already entered and actually do math based upon those. They can be hyperlinks or an existing person or group that you're trying to secure around. So there's a lot of potential data that you can use to tie this information back and forth and really set limits around what can be done with that. So how would you use this, or why would you use this metadata? So let's take this as an example. On the left-hand side, we have a traditional file server structure. Pretty simple, right? We've got folders, we've got files inside folders, we've got this structure kind of built out. Metadata allows us to take that simple folder structure and replicate it essentially. So we can either build folders in SharePoint or we can use metadata to perform those actions. If we use metadata, the nice part about this is we can basically pivot that data into multiple formats. In this scenario, the file structure that I have inside the folders, it's one way. I can't change that. If I want to look at it for all Word docs, I can't change the way I'm looking for that folder structure for Word docs. I can do a search for that, but I can't really change the way that I get that list or that view. In the right-hand pane, you'll see that right now it's grouped by doc type, but I could actually group by business group, or I could group by document type, or I could group by who last modified those documents. This really does provide a structural system that can change and update based upon those keywords or that metadata information. So by being able to flip back and forth, we get a lot of pictures or a lot of ways of being able to see the same data, but in different formats that might work better for us. So if I think about like a standardized process that we might have inside of our company, we have phases inside that process. Maybe I want to look at the documents by phase this time, but the next time I look at those documents, I might want to look at them based upon importance or based upon whether or not they've been ratified. So I can easily just change the view of the information that I'm getting into to completely change the structure that I'm looking at that data and accessing those files from. Yes, Nate.
Hey, Gerald. Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about is just putting this into perspective. If you've talked to us where we're not typically recommending just copying and pasting your current file structure into SharePoint if you're trying to make that move, it's because of all this. is that there's so much more you can do with it that does require, and unfortunately, the added ability adds complexity, and we just, and it might, we just wanted to make sure that we're educating folks on, this is why we're not recommending just a simple copy and paste, but there's things to think through as far as how you might try and use this data differently and use the capabilities of SharePoint differently. Again, unfortunately, with added complexity, added thought process and time, but it is something that there's some really cool stuff you can do with SharePoint differently than a file structure, than the traditional file structure.
Yeah, and we're actually Stephanie, if you want to try to post a poll and see if anybody can answer, we understand that not everybody can see these, but that is the we're going to see if it gets any better here as we go along. But much to your point, Nate, is hey, I want to move this server to SharePoint, right? Why can't I? What are the things that I really have to think about when I'm doing this? Because there are a lot of big catch-22s when you're doing this. Probably the first one, speed of access. So most of the time, if you are accessing SharePoint, you are going to be using, I should say there are multiple methods of accessing SharePoint. Each of them has different performance issues. But there is a key piece, is most of the time, if you want to use the enhanced filters and views and all that structure, and especially that metadata, you are using an internet browser to access those files. And that is, if I'm drilling through data sets or I'm looking through that, I have that latency of using the browser versus the standard Windows File Explorer that we're all used to. There is kind of a latency difference. Now that can also be counteracted by saying, hey, I've got all this power of search and filters and views that might make it faster to use that kind of thing. We aren't saying that these are pros or cons one way or the other. They're contemplation points. They're things that you really have to think about when you're talking about doing this. You also have to think about large files. How are you going to handle large files? If I have that, those Word documents probably are okay moving up and down, but what happens if I do have that 100 meg file? I now have to transfer that up and down across those internet connections. And that can be a major issue, where if I have that locally on my file server, that can be much, much faster for us. How about reliance on internet access? Unfortunately, if we think about our standard office environment, if we don't have internet, it impacts our business, but does it impact to the point where we can't open our files, we can't access our data, we could be considered dead in the water ultimately if we didn't have that information. So that really is a big deal. So it might mean that we need, if we're going to move our files up to that system, might mean that we need multiple internet connections to be able to load balance and protect ourselves against some kind of an outage or performance issue. We've also got what devices are able to access SharePoint. Maybe you have automation or different machine controllers, scanners, printers, devices like that actually interface and save files directly to file servers. Are those going to be able to save files to SharePoint? Are they capable of accessing? Much exactly down that same line. Are there programs inside your system that actually want to save their data someplace? Are they able to share data in SharePoint? Take a good example. QuickBooks wants to have a central server if you have multiple people accessing that database. That centralized database can't be in SharePoint. It has to be on a local server or workstation to handle that. So really understanding that there are going to be programs that are not going to handle accessing data through any of their access methodologies. It's just not going to like it. So keeping that in mind, that database, flat file database type systems are not going to work very well for that kind of thing. Pros and cons of metadata. Like, hey, we just showed you some really cool stuff that can happen out of metadata, but there's a lot of cons to it too. Want to make sure that you are thinking about that that we aren't trying to build a structure that's either too complicated that nobody fills out the metadata, or is too simple that it really isn't providing you any benefit either. So really kind of thinking through that process. Naming limitations. There are limitations around naming files. There are certain characters you cannot use in SharePoint, but you can use on a file server, and vice versa. So really kind of thinking about that, and especially if you're talking about those other applications or legacy systems that need to access that data. And then sharing documents. This is both a pro and a con. Sharing documents outside the company, do we want to allow it? Do we not? How do we secure it? How do we make sure that it is? maybe this is an advantage to using SharePoint. Maybe it's a disadvantage. Making sure you think through how sharing documents outside the company or even controlling that is really a big deal. And then how can your business use workflow to really benefit from this kind of stuff? Are there functions around this? So really moving data to SharePoint from a file server standpoint might make sense. It might not, completely based upon what your business is designed around. So we talk about the file server for a lot of your company files, but what happens if we start talking about your file server in the case of your personal data, or your direct working files, so the files that you would have in your personal folders? This is where Microsoft has yet again given us one name for multiple products. So probably heard of OneDrive, right? Well, OneDrive is not actually the OneDrive a lot of businesses think about. OneDrive itself is a personal product that you can buy from Microsoft as a personal person, does not get tied to any kind of business account. In fact, you can't even sign up with them if you have business accounts. They give you 5 gig free, you can upgrade it. It really is defined as its own thing, but this is your personal, like your home OneDrive account. So that's kind of tied to that kind of stuff. It gives you very similar features, but it really is not related to anything we're going to talk about from now on. You also have OneDrive for Business. That big difference is that for business side. This is actually built on SharePoint technology and is actually housed inside of your tenant inside 365. You have the same cloud accessibility just like you do SharePoint apps. You can still do a lot of the same functions, except you get greatly enhanced storage capabilities. So you have 1 terabyte per person and up to an unlimited amount of storage. So that's pretty significant and an amazing feature to have. And it runs on that same SharePoint infrastructure. So you get a lot of the same capabilities and controls that you would have around SharePoint in OneDrive also. So the capability of file sharing, revision histories, and all those kinds of controls, you get all inside there. And then there's a third app that a lot of people get confused about because, well, OneDrive is OneDrive, right? Well, then there's also the OneDrive application that you have sitting on your computer. So that can either be running on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. We've got apps that support all of those, and that allows you syncing and accessing OneDrive from typical Explorer or browser-based Windows, but it also allows you to synchronize SharePoint libraries back down to your device also. So it becomes a multiple point access tool for what you're trying to do. The cool part about OneDrive application on a machine or on a computer is that it can access multiple OneDrive accounts. So I can access my OneDrive for Business personal that I have at work. I can also access my personal OneDrive account. I can access my SharePoint libraries that I have for my company, but I can also access SharePoint libraries that have been shared to me from other companies. I can access other OneDrive accounts that I have for other companies. I can access all of that data all using one system, and it actually will synchronize that data appropriately. So really kind of a very powerful tool, and it's actually getting really powerful with some of the latest revs. So what are the big benefits of using OneDrive for Business? That anywhere access, right? I can access it via the web interface. I have access to my files. I can see what I'm sharing. I can access a lot of that data. You know, how many people have 1 terabyte hard drives in their laptops anymore? Not very many people. Well, now all of a sudden I have 1 terabyte of storage available to me. And if I think about that, I even have the ability to expand it up to unlimited if I have an E3 or E5 license. You know, by default, I'm going to call this out. You get 1 terabyte. If you have an E3 or E5 license, an admin can move you up to 5 terabytes. But it is actually unlimited. You just have to call Microsoft and have them work with you to actually make it unlimited. But yeah, you can. They actually say that you have to be at 4 terabytes before they'll even consider it at this point. But really powerful to being able to move stuff around. It's a really that capability is huge. Data sync, the ability to store and retrieve local information, and also share that data. So I can now look at my local OneDrive application and see what data I'm synchronizing, what data is strictly up in the cloud, what data will always be on my laptop, where it's being shared. I can even get easy views, as you'll see on the screen. There's that status icon that tells you information about what's actually happening out there. I also get versioning and history. So what if I want to see, you know, how many times have I had a file on my local computer and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have saved that. I just overwrote, last month's work or something like that. Now all of a sudden I can pull that back because I do have all of those versions. I have that history. I have that information about what's actually being done to that file. I also have collaboration capabilities. And then you also have that there's this backup feature that is also included on the PC versions that a lot of people don't realize, where it actually synchronizes your documents, desktop, and pictures folders. So now all of a sudden those key profile items that are those, what happens if my laptop gets lost or destroyed, this helps protect that data and make sure that it's always synchronized and safe for you. Okay, another quick poll asking whether or not you use OneDrive. So Teams files, right? So now we've talked about SharePoint, we've talked about OneDrive. We know that they're all basically running on the SharePoint platform. We've talked about Teams being a key interface into that SharePoint platform. So how does it actually store its files based upon what we're trying to do? Really, if we're talking about teams and channels, when we talk about those are actually tied to those same O365 groups that we talked about in the last meeting, but because it's tied to those O365 groups, it's going to use that O365 SharePoint site that gets generated to store those documents in a document library. And much to the thing, every channel gets its own subfolder inside the shared documents document library that gets created inside of that group. So everything that we look at in the illustration on the screen, you'll see that the SharePoint team 1 has 3 channels underneath it, and those channels all get shared folders underneath the shared documents structure. So really kind of a cool thing. Those security inheritances all come from that O365 group. If you create a private channel basically builds a unique folder underneath the library that then secures it in a slightly different way, limiting it to a separate identified user group instead of a actual O365 group. So that's why you have to be a member of the O365 group in order to access one of those private channels. It's kind of a sub security level that is applied to that folder in the structure. But what about files that we have in chat, right? So maybe we have the conversation of I'm having a chat with somebody else here, and I share a Word document out, like, hey, take a look at this document, let me know what you think. Those are actually stored in your OneDrive for Business account. They are stored underneath the sender's documents. So if one person is constantly the person sending out those documents, they will be stored inside. So if I'm the one always sharing out the documents, I'm going to be the one storing those documents. If somebody shares a document with me, that document is actually stored in their repository. And this is also true for multiple person chats. So if you have multiple people in that chat, the person who actually says upload and share this document is the person that's actually going to store that document inside there. Each file is uniquely secured and structured and locked down inside the folder. So if you have OneDrive for Business right now and you're using Teams chats, you can go in there and look at it and see you'll see the Microsoft Teams chats files inside your folder structure. That automatically gets created the first time you try to share a file inside Teams. And it will actually, you can see the kind of the structure that it does and how it hides those files. Now, if you are sharing a file that is already in your OneDrive, it just shares it out and permissions it right from the location it's at. It does not move it to that folder. Okay. What about, so we just talked about Teams, but what about other O365 apps? So we have Planner, Power BI, Power Automate, all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? They all store their stuff inside O365 also. So if you have a Planner plan that you have, inside of each of those tasks, maybe you upload a Word document or attach a Word document inside there. That information does get stored within the O365 group associated with that plan. And kept inside of it is a different document library, but it is inside of the same SharePoint structure. Same thing with workspaces for Power BI, Power Automate, Power Apps. those workspace documents, those structures are all shared within those systems. And forms, if you do any workspace collaboration in forms, so sharing out form documents, it will drop them inside that team's shared folders. So really, really kind of powerful. Now that we kind of know the big picture of what all of these components are when we add them together, is how can we use this to actually benefit for what we're trying to do, right? Do you have a workflow around actually using these technologies to collaborate and utilize and do all that? So ultimately, this is how you'd start putting it together. You would be able to do your initial working drafts, your test stuff in either your OneDrive for Business or your team site. You'll start building it inside there. You can start using Teams to collaborate. You can start, having multiple people interface it. So a lot of times what I'll start doing is I'll write that first draft myself. I will then post it to a team site, and allow multiple people to start giving me feedback, start collaborating on that. And at the point in time where we actually build a revision of that, we publish it to a read-only format, so like a PDF file. We store that PDF file out in a different structure. That is usually a SharePoint team site or intranet site, that has a different security structure around it, different permissioning level, different automation rule set than what Teams does. We post that out there, and then what happens when I need to update that document? We go back and we collaborate in that document in the working side of things in our team site, and we push it back to the intranet when we're ready to ratify it again. So really, when you start thinking about how do you use this inside your business, do you have approval chains that you have to worry about? Do you have what those final versions are? Do you have what kind of security exists? Are you going to allow those documents to be published in a more public state, or do you have the appropriate security on that team site or that intranet site to handle those kinds of security? What about regulatory? What if you're underneath some kind of an ISO control? Do you have those rules established as to how you utilize these functions to handle meeting the requirements of those various regulation kind of controls? We do have our last poll of the session here. And then basically, what do I expect you to walk away from this with? So ultimately, hey, we learned that SharePoint files are really tied to a database structure. So the file is, it's not just a file sitting inside of a folder like it is on a file server. It really is stored with additional sets of data that allows us to use metadata and structures to be able to easily move things around. There are some pros and cons to doing it that way. And we did talk about what that means for moving your file server to SharePoint. It's not just a copy paste kind of scenario. There are tools that let you do that. You can definitely do it. It's just that there are benefits to using and rethinking your way of setting up those structures before you actually just copy paste it. Really being able to use metadata to look at your data and to organize it in different formats really is going to be beneficial. We also learned that there's many types of OneDrive, right? So if we say OneDrive, do I mean OneDrive? Do I mean OneDrive, or do I mean OneDrive? So really understanding what that means and what OneDrive for Business is operating on, which is different than OneDrive, and how the application itself interfaces with all of those. And we also learned how Teams interfaces with all of this, and how when we store a file in Teams, depending on where we're sharing it from, can mean different things. It can mean that it's stored in different ways. And we also looked at how to put all this together and actually build a document lifecycle as to how to update and how to preserve some of that documentation and actually kind of work through that. At this point in time, I'd like to open it up for any questions that might be out there. I know that we did have some problems with the surveys or the polls inside the chat today, so I will make sure that Stephanie gets that out when she sends out the post-event survey. We'll also, I think she's also posted the actual survey, or she'll be posting the actual survey in case you do have access to the chat. If you'd rather fill out the survey right now, you can. But definitely trying to do that. So.
All right, Gerald, we have our first question from Jake. So Jake, I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand, but go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
All right, so we have not moved all our file storage over to SharePoint yet, basically because it's kind of a mess. So do you have anything you'd recommend as far as maybe a SharePoint developer or ways to lock file folders down so that it's not just, the Wild West where people can kind of do whatever they want?
Yeah, so this is really wanting to so if anything, you're actually in a beneficial state, right? Because you do have this mess, you don't have a structure that you want to keep. So that's actually a benefit in this scenario. You can actually start fresh, really define the structure, the way you would want to use that data, how you'd want to have that data sitting around, and kind of is it department based? Is it need based? Is it how does that data start getting organized? And then actually flowing that direction down through that process. That's how I would start it out, and actually don't try to save the structure you already have, and actually start again and just kind of utilize whatever utilize the fact that you are in this mess of a state to try to produce the best option for you in the long run. Little more work, but in the long run, it's going to provide a better solution for you.
Yeah, Gerald, the only other the comment I'd make on that is that if you have the opportunity of working with a department or smaller group inside of your organization where you can work through the kinks, because one of the things that we found is that as you start using and moving things to SharePoint and using Teams, you learn as you go, and things that you thought you wanted when you're developing in theory versus what you want once you start actually using it are slightly different. And so I would maybe, if you have the opportunity to do this, try and see if you can work with like a pilot group or a subset of people that are maybe a little more savvy that can give you good feedback, from which you can then kind of iterate your structure, and that you can then maybe roll out to the rest of your organization because you have a better understanding. If you have the benefit of time to do that, I would strongly recommend that, to think through it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, so we've got another question here from Don. I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand, but go ahead and unmute yourself, Don Morgan, and please ask your question.
Thank you. So in the context of application servers, and you mentioned QuickBooks, for example, are there options for so-called legacy apps that still need access to a file server? Is that something that the OneDrive client can fill the need of, or is that just a hard, not an option?
I'm going to say it's a 90% non-option. There is a chance that the application will work. It kind of depends upon the application itself. But in the case of a QuickBooks or something like that, you're pretty much going to be stuck with some kind of a database server, an application server, or utilizing more and more of these applications are starting to build their own cloud services. So like QuickBooks does have a QuickBooks Cloud version. You have to evaluate whether or not that meets your business requirements, but that might be an option for you depending upon what you're trying to do. There are a lot of, if I think about like flat file databases or applications that just access a structured data set of files, that doesn't, just because we can map a drive to SharePoint doesn't mean that that's going to actually work appropriately, because one of those things that you have to realize is even though I'm mapping a drive to SharePoint, I'm actually accessing it via web calls. So I'm actually, every time I go to access a file, I'm not caching any of that data. I'm actually accessing that data straight in and out from the web. So latency becomes an issue, doing directory lookups becomes an issue, all of that kind of stuff, which may impact or make that application inoperable.
Looks like Don has a follow-up question. Yeah.
Yeah. As far as backups go, obviously revision history itself is not a backup. I take it, does Mytech just recommend, was it Vault America or our 365 backup platform? Is that how we internally take care of backups for SharePoint?
Yes. So that is a good question. Just because Microsoft has built this platform and you have the revision controls, you have all that kind of stuff, doesn't mean that you have a backup. So yes, we do recommend the usage of a backup technology to handle that data. That gives you longer term archiving. That gives you additional data sets beyond just the revisioning. Gives you longer term controls around some of that kind of stuff. So yes, those would be like the tools that we would use to handle that. And we do have solutions that we sell our clients and include with our services that would be part of that. So yeah.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, if you're for those of you who might be, it's built into kind of our offering as far as having O365 backup for our clients. However, if you're looking for a third party, or if you're not one of our clients, be aware that not all O365 backups back up everything that you want to back up. There's some that only are backing up the email side. There's some that might only do that. There's instead of the entire ecosystem. So just be aware that there's differences in the types of backups that are out there. Make sure that they meet your requirements, whether it just be for pure backup, or if you need e-discovery or archival capabilities, backing up all of SharePoint and all the other planner and Power Apps and all those kind of things. So just be aware of that. But again, that's also where we're here to help if that's something you're trying to figure out. I don't see any other questions here. So we probably are clear to wrap up. So I would like to say thanks for joining, and I'll hand it back to you, Gerald, for a second. But stay tuned for the follow-up email for which will have the survey as well as all the polls that we did today. We're also going to be, because of the July 4th holiday next month, the 3rd, I believe, is the first Friday of the month. So we're not going to be doing this on July 3rd. We're doing it, I believe, the following Thursday. Is that the targeted? The following Thursday. So the Thursday after the July 4th weekend is when we're planning on hosting this for the next session. And by all means, please give us content. We have kind of a library of things that we kind of want to go through, or that we've thought through going through, but we also rather cater this to if you've got specific things you feel like you'd want us to go a little deeper on. So that's where we're asking those poll questions and that feedback in the survey that'll come afterwards. So stay tuned for that, and give us the feedback that you feel appropriate. But otherwise, Gerald, any comments you have to wrap it up?
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify that communication about the next Thursday after that Thursday, that's the 4th. So that is actually July 9th is going to be our next session. The details and the link will be in the follow-up email that will be sent out a little bit later today. So definitely look for that, and look forward to seeing you all. Just to kind of clarify that communication, and appreciate everybody coming in.